The Vienna Music Academy was not a place for people like Rosa. It was a place for the rich, the talented, and the chosen. Students here came from wealthy families. They wore expensive clothes, they carried instruments that cost more than Rosa would earn in 10 years. And every single one of them walked past her like she did not exist. Rosa had worked as a cleaner at the academy for 12 years. Every evening, when the last student left and the last teacher locked their office, she would arrive with her cart, mops, buckets, cleaning sprays, and old rags. That was her world. She would start on the 3rd floor and work her way down, scrubbing floors that students had walked on without a second thought, polishing windows that reflected a life she would never have. She never complained. Not once. Because this job, as invisible as it made her feel, was the only thing standing between her family and the streets. Rosa was a single mother. Her husband had left when their daughter was only 2 years old. He had promised to send money. He had promised to come back, but promises mean nothing when they come from someone who was never planning to keep them. So Rosa did what any mother would do. She worked. She survived. She made sure her daughter had food on the table and a roof over her head, even if that roof leaked when it rained and that food was sometimes just bread and butter for dinner. Her daughter's name was Lila. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with big brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. Lila was a quiet child. She did not talk much, did not ask for toys or treats like other children. She understood, even at her young age, that her mother was tired, that money was tight, that asking for things would only add weight to shoulders that were already carrying too much. Every evening, Lila would come to the academy with her mother. There was no one to watch her at home, and Rosa could not afford a babysitter. So Lila would sit in the corner of whatever room her mother was cleaning, doing her homework under the dim lights, trying to stay out of the way. But here is the thing about Lila. She was not just sitting there. She was watching. She was listening. And she was learning in a way that no one, not even her mother, could have imagined. The Vienna Music Academy was one of the most famous music schools in the world. The greatest pianists, violinists, and composers had walked these halls, and during the day, while Rosa was home resting before her night shift, these halls were filled with music. Students practiced for hours. Teachers gave lessons that cost more per hour than Rosa earned in a week. And the sound of pianos echoed through every corridor, every room, every corner of the building. Lila had first heard the piano when she was 5 years old. Her mother had brought her to work early one evening, and a student was still practicing in one of the smaller rooms. Lila had stopped in the hallway, frozen, her small hand gripping her mother's fingers. The sound coming from that room was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was sad and beautiful at the same time. It made her chest feel tight. It made her want to cry, though she did not know why. From that day on, Lila became obsessed. She would find excuses to wander the halls while her mother cleaned. She would press her ear against doors, listening to students practice. She would peek through windows, watching their fingers dance across the black and white keys. She memorized everything. The way their hands moved, the way their bodies swayed, the way they closed their eyes when the music became too beautiful to bear. At night, when she and her mother returned to their tiny apartment, Lila would lie in bed and replay the music in her head. Every note, every pause, every rise and fall. It was like having a secret world that belonged only to her. A world where she was not the cleaner's daughter. A world where she was someone. One day, Rosa noticed her daughter tapping her fingers on the kitchen table in a strange pattern. It was not random. It was precise, intentional. Rosa watched for a moment, confused, then went back to making dinner. She did not think much of it. But Lila was not just tapping. She was playing. In her mind, that kitchen table was a grand piano, and she was performing a piece she had heard a student play 3 weeks ago. She remembered every single note. A few weeks later, Lila asked her mother a question that broke Rosa's heart. "Mama, can I learn piano?" Rosa stopped washing the dishes. She did not turn around. She could not. Because she knew what she had to say, and she knew it would crush her daughter's dreams. "Piano lessons are expensive, my love," she said quietly. Maybe one day, when things get better. Lila did not ask again. She understood. But understanding did not stop the longing. It did not stop the ache in her chest every time she heard music floating through the academy halls. It did not stop her from dreaming. So Lila found another way. She asked her mother for some old cardboard and a black marker. Rosa thought she wanted to make a school project. But that night, Lila did something that would later bring tears to the eyes of the greatest musicians in the world. She drew a piano. 88 keys, carefully measured, perfectly spaced. Black keys and white keys, just like the real thing. She taped the cardboard to her small desk, sat down on her bed, and placed her fingers on the silent keys. And she began to play. There was no sound, of course. But in Lila's mind, the music was deafening. She played the pieces she had memorized. She practiced for hours, her fingers moving across the cardboard, her eyes closed, her body swaying just like the students she had watched. She could hear every note in her head, clear as day. She knew when she made a mistake. She knew when she got it right. Night after night, while her mother slept in the next room, Lila practiced on her paper piano. She got faster, more precise, more confident. The music that lived inside her grew stronger, louder, more desperate to be heard. But no one was listening. To the world, she was invisible. Just like her mother. Just the cleaner's daughter who sat in the corner doing homework. No one looked at her twice. No one asked her name. No one knew that inside this quiet little girl was a gift so rare, so powerful, that it would one day make legends stand in awe. But that moment had not come yet. For now, Lila was still invisible. Still silent. Still playing on a piano made of cardboard and dreams, and waiting for the night that would change everything. It was the coldest night of the year. Snow was falling outside, covering the streets of Vienna in a thick white blanket. The city was quiet. Most people were home, wrapped in warm blankets, drinking hot tea by their windows. But Rosa was at work, pushing her cleaning cart through the empty halls of the music academy, her tired bones aching from the cold. Lila was with her, as always. She sat in the corner of the grand concert hall, her small body wrapped in an old coat that was 2 sizes too big. It had been her mother's once, years ago, before the fabric had faded and the buttons had fallen off. But it was warm, and that was all that mattered. The concert hall was the most beautiful room in the entire academy. It had tall ceilings painted with angels and clouds. The walls were covered in dark red velvet. Crystal chandeliers hung from above, catching whatever little light there was and scattering it like diamonds. And at the center of the stage sat the most magnificent thing Lila had ever seen, a Steinway grand piano. It was enormous, black and shiny, like it had been carved from the night sky itself. Lila had seen it many times before. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, the hall was darker than usual. Quieter, and someone had forgotten to turn off the spotlight above the stage. It shone down on the piano like a beam from heaven, making it glow. Lila could not take her eyes off it. She tried to focus on her homework. She really did. But the piano kept calling to her. It was like a magnet, pulling at something deep inside her chest. Her fingers itched. Her heart raced. She could almost hear the music it held inside, waiting to be released. Rosa was on her hands and knees near the entrance, scrubbing a stubborn stain that someone had left on the marble floor. She cursed under her breath. It was wine. Probably from one of the fancy events the Academy hosted for rich donors. These people spilled expensive drinks on floors they would never have to clean, and Rosa was left to deal with the mess. Then her radio crackled. It was the security guard. There was a problem in the administrative wing on the other side of the building. A pipe had burst from the cold, and water was flooding one of the offices. They needed Rosa immediately. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked over at her daughter. "Lila, I have to go help with something. Stay here. Do not move. Do not touch anything. I will be back in 15 minutes. Lila nodded. "Okay, Mama." Rosa hesitated. She looked at her daughter, then at the piano on the stage, then back at her daughter. Something flickered in her eyes. Worry. Maybe. Or perhaps something else, but she did not have time to think about it. She grabbed her bucket and hurried out of the hall, her footsteps echoing until they faded into silence. And then, Lila was alone. She sat very still for a long moment. The concert hall was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. The spotlight still shone on the piano. The snow still fell outside the tall windows, and the piano sat there, waiting. Lila tried to look away. She tried to think about her homework. She tried to remind herself of what her mother had said. Do not touch anything. But the pull was too strong. It was like trying to hold back the ocean with her bare hands. Slowly, she stood up. Her legs felt weak. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She took one step toward the stage. Then another. Then another. Each step felt like it took an hour. Each step brought her closer to the thing she had dreamed about for 4 years. She reached the stairs that led up to the stage. 3 small steps. That was all that separated her from the piano. She climbed them, her old shoes making no sound on the polished wood, and then she was there, standing in front of the Steinway grand piano. Close enough to touch it, Lila's hands were shaking. She reached out and ran her fingers along the smooth black surface. It was cold. Solid. Real. This was not cardboard. This was not a dream. This was the most beautiful instrument in the world. And she was touching it. She walked around to the front and looked at the keyboard. 88 keys. Just like her paper piano. But these keys were made of ivory and ebony. They were smooth and heavy and perfect. The fallboard was closed, covering them, protecting them from dust and unworthy hands. Lila knew she should stop. She knew that if anyone caught her, her mother would lose her job. They would be thrown out. They would have nothing. The risk was too great. The consequences were too terrible, but she had waited so long. 4 years of watching through windows. 4 years of pressing her ear against doors. 4 years of playing on cardboard while other children played on real instruments. 4 years of silence. She could not wait anymore. With trembling fingers, Lila lifted the fallboard. The keys gleamed in the spotlight. White and black, stretching out before her like a road to another world. She pulled out the bench and sat down. It was the perfect height. Like it had been made for her. She placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool to the touch. Smooth. Alive. And then she took a breath. She did not know what would happen. She had never played a real piano before. What if all those years of practice meant nothing? What if her fingers did not know what to do? What if the music in her head refused to come out? But she had to try. Lila closed her eyes. She thought about the first piece she had ever memorized. A Chopin ballade. It was one of the hardest pieces in the world. Professional pianists spent years perfecting it, but Lila did not know that. She only knew that it was beautiful, that it told a story of longing and loss and hope, that it made her feel something words could never express. She pressed the first key. A single note rang out into the empty hall. Pure, clear, perfect. Lila almost cried. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. And she had made it. Her finger, her touch, her music. She pressed another key. Then another. And suddenly, the music began to flow. It started slowly, like a stream finding its way through rocks. Her fingers moved across the keys, remembering every movement she had practiced on her cardboard piano. But this was different. This was real. The notes had weight. They had power. They filled the concert hall like a living thing, bouncing off the walls, rising to the painted ceiling, wrapping around Lila like a warm embrace. She forgot where she was. She forgot who she was. There was no concert hall, no cleaning cart, no poverty, no fear. There was only the music. Her fingers moved faster. The melody grew stronger. Lila swayed on the bench, her small body moving with the rhythm, her eyes still closed, her face peaceful. She was not a cleaner's daughter anymore. She was not invisible. She was the music itself. The Chopin ballade poured out of her like it had been locked inside for years, desperate to escape. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was exactly as she had heard it, exactly as she had practiced it 1,000 times, on paper keys that made no sound. But now there was sound. Now there was life. Lila did not hear the door open. She did not see the three figures step into the concert hall. She did not notice them freeze in the doorway, their faces pale with shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. She just kept playing, and the music kept rising, filling the darkness, reaching for the stars, telling a story that no one had ever heard before. The story of a little girl who had nothing, and everything. At the same time, the three people standing in the doorway were not ordinary people. They were legends. The first was Maestro Friedrich Werner, a 72-year-old German conductor and pianist who had performed in every major concert hall on earth. He had played for presidents and kings. He had won every award the classical music world could offer. His recordings had sold millions of copies. Music critics called him the greatest living interpreter of Chopin, and no one disagreed. The second was Dame Victoria Hargrove, a British pianist in her 60s who had dedicated her life to teaching the next generation of musical geniuses. She had trained more international competition winners than any other teacher in history. Students begged for years just to have a single lesson with her. She was known for her sharp ears and even sharper tongue. Nothing impressed her. No one surprised her. She had seen it all. The third was Kenji Murakami, a Japanese virtuoso in his 50s who was famous for his technical perfection. His fingers could move faster than the human eye could follow. He had memorized over 500 pieces and could play any of them on command. Other pianists watched videos of his performances in slow motion, trying to understand how he did what he did. Most gave up. These three giants of classical music had not planned to be at the Academy that night. They had come for an emergency meeting about an upcoming international piano competition. There had been a scheduling conflict, a disagreement about judges, a problem that needed to be solved immediately. They had argued for 2 hours in a conference room, finally reached a compromise, and were on their way out when they heard something that stopped them in their tracks. Music, coming from the grand concert hall. At first, Friedrich thought it was a recording. It had to be. The Academy was supposed to be empty at this hour, but as they walked closer, they realized the sound was too alive, too present to be a recording. Someone was playing, and whoever it was, they were playing Chopin's Ballade, no, 1-inch G minor. This was not a piece for beginners. It was not even a piece for intermediate players. The Ballade, no one, was a monster. It demanded everything from a pianist: speed, precision, emotional depth, physical endurance. Most professionals practiced it for years before they dared to perform it in public. Many never performed it at all, too afraid of its difficulty, too aware of how easily it could expose their weaknesses. But the music coming from the concert hall was flawless. The three legends exchanged confused looks. Who could be playing at this hour? A teacher working late? A student who had snuck back in? They moved quietly toward the door and pushed it open. What they saw made no sense. On the stage, bathed in a single spotlight, sat a little girl. She could not have been older than 9 or 10. She was tiny, her feet barely reaching the pedals. She wore an old coat that was far too big for her. Her hair was messy, tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked like she belonged on a playground, not on the stage of one of the most prestigious concert halls in Europe. But she was playing, and she was playing like nothing they had ever heard before. Friedrich felt his knees go weak. He grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. In 72 years of life, in 50 years of performing, he had never experienced anything like this. The music, pouring from that piano, was not just technically perfect. It was alive. It breathed. It told a story so deep, so true, that it reached into his chest and grabbed his heart. Victoria brought her hand to her mouth. Her eyes, which had stayed dry through countless performances by countless prodigies, began to fill with tears. She had spent her entire career searching for talent, real talent, the kind that could not be taught, could not be manufactured, could not be explained. She had found glimpses of it over the years. Sparks, hints, But this was not a spark. This was a fire. Kenji stood frozen, his mind racing, trying to process what his ears were telling him. He knew this piece inside and out. He had performed it hundreds of times. He knew every difficult passage, every tricky transition, every place where lesser pianists stumbled. But this child was not stumbling. She was flying. Her fingers moved with a confidence that should have been impossible for someone her age. Her phrasing was mature beyond belief. Her dynamics were perfect. Soft when they needed to be soft. Powerful when they needed to be powerful. How? How was this possible? The three of them stood in the doorway, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. The music filled the hall, rising and falling like waves on an ocean. The little girl on stage seemed completely unaware of their presence. Her eyes were closed, her body swayed with the melody. She was lost in another world, a world made entirely of sound and feeling. Friedrich felt tears running down his wrinkled cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He could not remember the last time music had made him cry. Decades. Perhaps. He had grown cynical over the years, surrounded by technically skilled performers who played the notes but missed the soul. But this child was all soul. Every note she played came from somewhere deep inside her. Somewhere real. Somewhere true. Victoria leaned toward Kenji and whispered, barely able to form the words. "Who is she?" Kenji shook his head slowly. "I do not know. I have never seen her before. This is impossible." Victoria whispered back. "Children do not play like this. Professionals do not play like this. This is—" She could not finish the sentence. There were no words for what she was witnessing. On stage, Lila reached the most difficult section of the ballade. It was a passage that had broken many professional pianists, a furious cascade of notes that required superhuman speed and absolute precision. Friedrich held his breath. This was where it would fall apart. This was where the illusion would shatter. But Lila did not falter. Her small fingers flew across the keys like they were made for this moment. The notes came faster and faster, building to an impossible crescendo. And she nailed every single one. Not a single mistake, not a single hesitation. Just pure, perfect music. Kenji let out a soft gasp. In all his years, he had never seen anyone play that passage so cleanly. Not even himself. The ballade moved into its final section, the melody returning, softer now, more tender. Lila's playing became gentle, almost fragile. The anger and passion of the earlier sections melted away, replaced by something like hope, like peace, like a prayer. And then, the final notes. They hung in the air, suspended. Beautiful beyond words. Lila held the last chord, letting it ring out into the empty hall, filling every corner, every shadow, every breath. And then, silence. Complete, total silence. Lila sat still for a long moment, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was breathing hard. Her small shoulders rose and fell. She had given everything she had to that performance, every ounce of her soul. Then, slowly, she opened her eyes, and she saw them. 3 strangers standing in the doorway. 3 faces staring at her with expressions she did not understand. Were they angry? Shocked? She could not tell. All she knew was that she had been caught. Terror flooded through her body. She leaped off the bench like it was on fire. Her mind raced with horrible thoughts. Her mother was going to lose her job. They were going to be thrown out on the street. It was all her fault. She had ruined everything. She looked for a way to escape, but the 3 figures were blocking the only door. She was trapped. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Then, one of them started to clap. It was the old man. The one with white hair and tears on his face. He was clapping slowly, his hands coming together like he was applauding something sacred. Then the woman joined him. Then, the Japanese man. The sound of their applause filled the concert hall, echoing off the walls, bouncing off the ceiling. It was not the polite applause of an audience being courteous. It was real. It was raw. It was the applause of three people who had just witnessed a miracle. Lila stood frozen on the stage, trembling, not understanding what was happening. And then the old man spoke, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please," he said softly. "Do not run. We just want to know. Who are you?" Ah! Before Lila could answer, the door behind them burst open, and Rosa walked in. Rosa stood in the doorway, her face pale with horror. She had heard the music from halfway across the building. At first, she thought someone had left a radio on, but as she got closer, as the sound grew louder, a terrible feeling had begun to grow in her stomach. She knew that music, she had heard it echoing through these halls 1,000 times. And somehow, deep in her bones, she knew who was playing it. Now, standing in the concert hall, seeing her daughter frozen on the stage, seeing three strangers in expensive clothes staring at her child, Rosa felt her world collapse. "Lila!" she cried out, rushing forward. "What have you done?" She pushed past the three figures without even looking at them. She ran to the stage, climbed the stairs, and grabbed her daughter by the shoulders. Lila was shaking. Tears were streaming down her small face. "I am sorry, Mama," Lila whispered. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to. I just wanted to play. Just once. Just one time." Rosa pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, her own tears falling now. She held Lila like she was trying to protect her from the entire world. Then she turned to face the three strangers, positioning herself between them and her child like a shield. "Please," Rosa said, her voice breaking. "Please, I beg you. Do not report this. I will pay for any damage. I will work extra hours. I will do anything. Just please, do not take my job. It is all we have. We have nothing else, please." She was shaking as badly as her daughter. Her hands were clasped together like she was praying. Years of dignity, years of quiet strength, all of it crumbled in that moment. She was just a mother, terrified for her child, terrified of losing everything. Friedrich stepped forward slowly. His face was kind, gentle. He raised his hands as if to calm a frightened animal. "Please," he said softly. "There is no need for fear. No one is in trouble. No one is going to lose their job." Rosa stared at him, not understanding. She looked at the other two strangers. The woman was wiping tears from her eyes. The Japanese man looked like he had just witnessed something from another world. "I do not understand," Rosa said. She touched the piano. She was not supposed to. "The rules say—" "Forget the rules," Victoria interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. She walked toward the stage, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Madam, do you have any idea what your daughter just did?" Rosa shook her head, confused. "She played music. I know she should not have. I know it was wrong. But she is just a child. She did not know any better." Victoria let out a small laugh. It was not a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone who could not believe what they had witnessed. "Your daughter," Victoria said slowly, "just performed one of the most difficult pieces in the entire classical piano repertoire. Chopin's Ballade. No one. Professional pianists study for years to play it. Many never master it. Your daughter played it perfectly, flawlessly, without a single mistake." Rosa blinked. She looked down at Lila, who was still hiding her face against her mother's chest. "That is not possible," Rosa said. "Lila has never had a piano lesson in her life. We cannot afford lessons. We cannot afford anything." Kenji stepped forward now. His expression was serious, intense. "Then how?" he asked. "How does she know how to play? Who taught her?" Rosa shook her head helplessly. "No one. No one taught her. She watches. She listens. She has been coming here with me for years. She sits in the corner while I clean. I thought she was doing homework. I did not know she was." Her voice trailed off. She did not know how to finish the sentence. Friedrich climbed the stairs to the stage. He moved slowly, carefully, not wanting to frighten the child any further. He knelt down, so that he was at Lila's level. His old knees protested, but he did not care. "Little one," he said gently. "Can you look at me?" Lila slowly lifted her head from her mother's chest. Her face was wet with tears. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked terrified. "You are not in trouble," Friedrich said. "I promise you. We are not angry. We are amazed. What you just did, it was extraordinary. But we need to understand. How did you learn to play like that?" Lila sniffled. She looked at her mother, as if asking for permission to speak. Rosa nodded, still confused, still scared, but trusting this kind old man with the gentle voice. "I watched," Lila said quietly. "Through the windows, through the doors. I watched the students practice, every day, for years. I memorized everything. The way their hands moved, the way they pressed the keys. I remembered all of it." Victoria brought her hand to her heart. "You learned by watching? Without ever touching a piano?" Lila nodded. Then she looked down at her feet, ashamed. "I practiced at home, but we do not have a piano. So Mama gave me some cardboard, and I drew the keys on it. I practiced on that, every night, for hours." The three legends looked at each other. The room was completely silent. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, but inside the concert hall, something far more incredible was happening. "A paper piano," Kenji whispered. "She learned on a paper piano." Friedrich felt fresh tears forming in his eyes. In his entire career, spanning 5 decades, he had never heard anything like this. He had taught students from wealthy families with the best instruments, the best teachers, every advantage money could buy. And none of them, not a single one, had ever played with the soul this child possessed. She had learned with nothing. Less than nothing. A cardboard drawing and a dream. "What is your name?" Friedrich asked. "Lila," the girl whispered. "Lila," Friedrich repeated, as if tasting the word. "Do you know who we are?" Lila shook her head. Friedrich smiled. "We are musicians. Like you. We have spent our entire lives playing the piano. And tonight, we heard something that we have never heard before. We heard you." Victoria moved closer. She knelt down beside Friedrich, her expensive dress pressing against the dusty stage floor. She did not care. Nothing mattered except this child. "Lila," Victoria said softly, "what you have is called a gift. It is not something that can be taught. It is not something that can be bought. You were born with it, and it would be a tragedy, a crime against music itself, to let that gift go to waste." Lila looked at her mother. Rosa's face was a mixture of confusion and hope. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she could see that these people were not threats. They were looking at her daughter with something like reverence. "What does this mean?" Rosa asked quietly. "What happens now?" Friedrich stood up, his knees cracking. He turned to face Rosa with a warm smile. "Now," he said, "everything changes." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He pressed it into Rosa's trembling hands. "I am the head of the piano faculty at this academy," he said. "And as of this moment, your daughter has a full scholarship. Tuition, instruments, books, everything will be paid for. She will never have to sit in the corner again. She will walk through the front doors like every other student. Because that is what she is now. A student. Our student." Rosa stared at the card. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She looked up at Friedrich, then at Victoria, then at Kenji. All three were nodding. "This is real?" Rosa whispered. "This is not a dream?" Victoria reached out and took Rosa's hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "This is very real," she said. "And it is only the beginning." Lila stood on the stage, surrounded by legends, her mother's arms around her, the piano gleaming behind her in the spotlight. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. For the first time in her life, Someone had seen her, and nothing would ever be the same again. The years that followed were like a dream Rosa never wanted to wake from. The morning after that magical night, Lila walked through the front doors of the Vienna Music Academy. Not through the service entrance. Not past the garbage bins and cleaning supplies. Through the grand marble archway, under the golden letters that spelled out the academy's name. Just like every other student, Rosa stood outside, watching through the window, tears rolling down her cheeks. A teacher came out and gently told her that parents were not supposed to stand on the sidewalk staring. Rosa apologized and turned to leave, but before she did, she looked back one more time and saw her daughter disappear into the building. Her little girl. The one who had practiced on cardboard. The one who had been invisible for so long. Now she was walking among the children of doctors and lawyers and businessmen. Now she belonged. The first few months were not easy. Some students whispered behind Lila's back. They called her the cleaner's daughter. They laughed at her old clothes and her worn-out shoes. They could not understand how someone like her could be among them. They had been training since they were toddlers. They had the best teachers, the best instruments, every advantage in the world. And yet this strange little girl, this nobody from nowhere, could outplay them all. But Lila did not let the whispers break her. She had spent years being invisible. She had survived on bread and butter. She had practiced on paper keys, while other children played video games. A few mean words from spoiled students were nothing compared to what she had already overcome. She practiced harder than anyone. She arrived at the academy before sunrise and stayed until the janitors kicked her out at night. She soaked up everything her teachers taught her like a sponge. Friedrich worked with her every week, guiding her, shaping her, watching in amazement as she grew stronger and stronger. Victoria pushed her to dig deeper into the emotion of every piece. Kenji taught her technical tricks that took other students years to master. By the time she was 12, Lila had won her first competition. It was a small regional contest, nothing special by international standards, but when she stepped onto the stage and sat down at the piano, something happened. The audience went silent, and when she finished playing, they rose to their feet and applauded for 3 full minutes. Rosa was in the audience that day. She sat in the back row, wearing her best dress, the one she saved for church on Easter Sunday. When she saw her daughter bow to the crowd, when she heard the thunder of applause, she sobbed so hard that the woman next to her asked if she was okay. More competitions followed, more victories. By 15, Lila was competing at the international level. By 17, she had won the prestigious European Young Pianists Award. Music magazines wrote about her. Journalists wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to know the story of the girl who had learned piano on a piece of cardboard, but Lila never let the fame change her. She still called her mother every night before bed. She still visited the Academy's concert hall after hours, sitting alone on the stage where everything had started, remembering the little girl who had been too scared to touch the keys. When Lila was 19 years old, she received the invitation that every pianist dreams of. She was asked to perform at Carnegie Hall in New York City, the most famous concert hall in the world, the stage where the greatest musicians in history had stood, and they wanted her. Rosa cried for 2 hours when Lila told her the news. She cried again when Lila bought her a plane ticket to New York, first class. Rosa had never been on an airplane before. She had never left Austria. She had spent her entire life cleaning floors and worrying about bills. And now her daughter was flying her across the ocean to watch her perform at Carnegie Hall. The night of the concert, Rosa sat in the front row. She wore a new dress that Lila had bought for her, a beautiful deep blue gown that made her feel like a queen. She looked around at the audience, at the wealthy patrons in their diamonds and suits, at the critics with their notebooks, at the cameras ready to broadcast the performance to millions of people around the world. And then the lights dimmed. A single spotlight appeared on the stage, and Lila walked out. She was beautiful. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not flashy. Her hair was pulled back, just like it had been on that snowy night 10 years ago. She walked to the piano, a magnificent Steinway grand, and sat down on the bench. The audience fell silent. 2,000 people, holding their breath, waiting. Lila looked out at the crowd. Her eyes found her mother in the front row. Rosa was already crying. Lila smiled. Just a little. Just for her. Then she turned to the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes, and she began to play. The piece she had chosen was Chopin's Ballade No One. The same piece she had played on that fateful night at the academy. The piece that had changed everything. The first notes floated out into the hall, soft and tender. Rosa pressed her hand to her heart. She remembered standing in the doorway of the concert hall, terrified that her daughter had ruined everything. She remembered the three strangers with tears in their eyes. She remembered the card pressed into her trembling hands. And now, 10 years later, here they were. Carnegie Hall. 2,000 people. The whole world watching. Lila played like she had never played before. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was poetry. The music rose and fell like the tide of an ocean, carrying the audience on a journey through joy and sorrow, hope and despair, darkness and light. People in the audience began to cry. Critics forgot to take notes. Even the cameramen stopped adjusting their equipment and simply watched. This was not just a performance. This was a soul being poured out for the world to see. When Lila reached the final notes, the hall was completely silent. She held the last chord, letting it ring out, filling every corner of the room. Then she lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was so deep it was almost holy. And then the audience exploded. 2,000 people leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening. People were shouting, crying, hugging strangers next to them. It was not just a standing ovation. It was a celebration. A recognition of something extraordinary. Lila stood up from the bench and bowed. Tears were streaming down her face. She looked at her mother in the front row. Rosa was standing, clapping, sobbing, her whole body shaking with joy. Lila walked to the edge of the stage. She reached for a microphone that had been set up for her to address the audience. The crowd slowly quieted down, eager to hear what she would say. Lila wiped her tears and took a deep breath. 10 years ago, she said, her voice soft but clear. I was a little girl who practiced piano on a piece of cardboard. I had never touched a real instrument. I had never had a lesson. I was the cleaner's daughter. I was invisible. The audience was completely silent. But my mother, Lila continued, her voice breaking. She worked every night, scrubbing floors, cleaning windows, so that I could have a chance. She gave me everything she had. She believed in me when no one else even knew I existed. She looked at Rosa. Their eyes met. Mama, Lila said, this is for you. Everything I am, everything I have done, it is because of you. Rosa could not breathe. She could not move. She just stood there, tears pouring down her face, as 2,000 people turned to look at her. And then something incredible happened. The entire audience began to applaud again. But this time, they were not clapping for Lila. They were clapping for Rosa. For the woman who had cleaned their floors. For the mother who had sacrificed everything. For the invisible woman who had raised a star. Rosa stood in the front row of Carnegie Hall, surrounded by strangers who were cheering for her. And for the first time in her life, she understood. She had never been invisible. She had been building something beautiful all along, and now the whole world could see it.